Good morning. We are in the INSS podcast speaking about the annexation. Of course, the core issue of the subject now.
Applying sovereignty.
Yes, okay. You will explain the difference between them. With us, Ambassador Dan Shapiro, former Ambassador Dan Shapiro, and Colonel. Former colonel, no, in reserve still.
The ambassador also stays.
In reserves,
in reserves, yes.
Pnina Sharvit Baruch, which she is responsible in the legal aspect in our institute, and I am Udi Dekel, the Managing Director of the INSS. And I would like to start and to say some word about the annexation, and then it will be open discussions between us. So first of all, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, this is a one-time opportunity for Israel now, the issue of the annexation, because he said that until today, Israel has always been the one that had to concede, to give, to freeze, to withdraw, and now President Trump has said that this is not Israel that need to concede, but rather the Palestinians. Okay, there is a big change in the understanding that this is the only unique time that Israel can get something and not to give something. Of course, when you look upon that period, there is opportunity from the Israeli point of view of Netanyahu and his government, saying that now, we have a good friend in the White House that can support us by doing the annexation. The international community is focusing the crisis of the corona. The issue of the Palestinians is not important as it was before. So why not now? Because this is unique time for us. I call it I'm sorry to say, but in our military language, we call it game changers. When you feel that you have to change the reality and you would like to change the rule of the game, you do something which change the rule of the game, change the cards, and try to initiate a new reality which you believe that it will be better reality for you. And one of the major problems when we look upon the annexation, that we don't see real strategic advantage for Israel. It's very difficult to find strategic advantage to Israel. There is opportunity, yes. Maybe nothing will happen, but still you cannot see what will be the outcome, especially when you look upon the long term. We don't know yet what is the map of the annexation. And there is many versions about what kind of map Netanyahu is going to bring to the government and maybe to the Knesset. So the first map, of course, it was the map that he came with that during the elections in Israel, annexation of the Jordan Valley. And the idea was that to apply the sovereignty, and you will explain later on the difference between annexation and applying the sovereignty in the Jordan Valley. And the main idea is the Jordan Valley is very important for Israel because of security, especially defensive borders in the eastern side of Israel against any threat that can come from the east. And it's in the middle, in the core of the consensus of the Israeli society that in the end state we would like to see the Jordan Valley as part of Israel, in any kind, even agreement between us and the Palestinians. So that was the reason to come with it. Later on, there was another idea, which saying applying the sovereignty or applying the Israeli law in the settlement area. And in this case, there is two options, because when you speak about the settlement area, there is the build-up area of the settlements, which is less than 3% of the West Bank. But there is also the jurisdiction area of the settlements, and the aggregate of jurisdiction area of all of the settlements in the West Bank is something like up to 10% of the West Bank, this is another story. This is not the same as 3%, okay? So this is another option. The other option that was on the table saying that there is important, what we call settlement blocks, especially those like in the envelope of Jerusalem, around Jerusalem, as Ma'ale Adumim, or Givat Ze'ev, and Gush Etzion, which protect Jerusalem all over. And there is another ideas of settlements, blocks which are western to the security or security barrier, which in that case, they already in some, for some reasons or some explanation, in the western side of the West Bank, because they are adjacent to what was the green line, so it's more easy to annex or applying the law there because it's already Israel. And there is a lot of other combinations because somebody can take only part of let's say the Jordan Valley, Ma'ale Adumim area eastern to Jerusalem, and another block, or somebody can decide taking only the Jordan Valley and the settlements area all over the West Bank. There is many options what kind of map Netanyahu is going to bring. And there is still discussions. I'm not sure that he really knows what will be the map that he is going to bring to the government. I would like to say only few things about the consequences, because when you do something like changing the rule of the game, you have to decide or to see what kind of consequences will be after your action. And the idea, of course, you would like to see positive consequences. But as I said before, if you look for what kind of strategic advantage Israel can achieve, so the security situation will not be better by doing that, any kind of annexation, never mind which size of annexation we are going to do. The economic situation will not be better. The Israeli legitimacy, international legitimacy will not be better. The relations between Israel and the Arab countries will not be those which we have relations, in low profile and things like that, but will not be better. So you cannot find something that will be better. Of course, somebody can say that, as I said before, this is opportunity, and by doing that, we anchor the most important interests of Israel for the future, like Jordan Valley, as I said before, or Jerusalem, that we have to protect Jerusalem all over, or something like that. But most of the discussions here in Israel, and I assume all over the world, what will be the immediate response by the others to that action? And not looking upon, okay, what if, we used in this institute to speak a lot about kind of ways, which is navigation system, that you have to put the destination. What is the destination? Is it lead us to destination of two-state or separation between us and the Palestinians? Or is it lead us to destination of mixing between the Israelis and the Palestinians? And as we see all kinds of maps that are on the table now, this is not in the direction of separation, this is in the direction of mixing between the population, the people, with the Israeli and the Palestinians. And in that case, I don't see any real strategic opportunity that we have to do it now. Please, Pnina.
Okay, so let's start with the terminology. Mm-hmm. So is it annexation? Is it applying sovereignty, applying the law? What is exactly the right term? So applying the law is the method. The way that the change will be is through applying the law. You could also potentially say we just want to apply the law. We are not dealing with the question of who the territory, who does it belong to issues of sovereignty, but that's not the issue here. It's not a technical move. It's a move that is intended to apply sovereignty over this territory through applying the Israeli law. The term annexation has a negative sound to it. It sounds like you are taking control of or applying yourself to something that belongs to someone else. That's why when you talk to governmental officials or the right wing will always call it applying sovereignty. They say this is a disputed area, or they even say maybe this is an area that belongs to us, to our history. We have the rights there, and until now we haven't applied our sovereignty there. We did that in East Jerusalem, but we didn't do it there, and now is the time to do it. And that's why they speak about applying sovereignty and not about annexation. That sounds as if we took it from someone else. So that's the terminology. it is important to note that indeed this territory never belonged to any other state. We're not annexing a territory that belongs to another state. It is a disputed territory. The rights of the Palestinians there are not, there was never a Palestinian state there. Their rights derive more from the right of self-determination, and which you could ask whether it applies to the whole of the territory or not. So we have here different perspectives, legal perspectives about this territory. Although on the political level, I think most of the world has views this territory as the one belonging to the Palestinians, at least that they have the better rights there. But that's something that is under the dispute. So that's about the terminology. Now, when we talk about what does it mean in practice, so once we apply the Israeli legislation there, one important difference, one important outcome is that according to Israeli legislation, and there's legislation on a referendum, a basic law referendum, any territory, once the Israeli law is applied to a certain territory, any change in that territory and giving it up to anyone else, whether unilaterally or through an agreement, requires either the agreement of 80 members of the Knesset or a referendum. Now they say that
80 members, it's 66% of the
yes,
Knesset.
out of 120, yes.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult number to get to, or a referendum. So some say you could change this law by 61 members and overcome this obstacle, but still the idea is that once such a move is done, it is difficult to roll back internally, and in an essence what it does is ties the hands of the future governments if they do want to reach any kind of negotiations with regards to the territories that the law has been applied to. So that's one major consequence.
But half of the people of Israel see that let's say event or as opportunity, as it's advantage.
I think tying the hand of future governments,
not accept Jews anymore,
is seen as an opportunity mainly by the ideology, by the right that are very concerned about any change. I think other Israelis are more concerned about security, and they have they do believe that we shouldn't uproot so many Israelis, but I'm not sure that they are really so concerned about every settlement. That brings us to the map. We don't know what the map is. If the map will apply only to the blocks, so I think that would be the consensus of many Israelis, that we're not going to go out of these blocks anyway. But if it starts applying, if we take the map of the Trump plan that includes every outpost in the middle of the area and creates a very difficult, indefensible border, then I think many Israelis, I'm not sure that if they have to pay the price of, for example, deterioration in security, economic expenses, international reactions, that's the price that they will be ready to pay. So then we are tying the hands of the next government that might say we don't want this part of, at least, that was annexed, and it might be more difficult to make the changes. So it does have a significance, and this brings me to the next point, really. What is the difference for the Israelis living in the settlements? Most of the Israeli legislation today applies to the settlers through two main mechanisms. If it's a personal law, it applies. The Israeli legislation includes the definition of residence, includes also those Israeli citizens living in the settlements. So all the personal legislation applies to them. And also there are the legislation that applies in the territory, these military orders of the military government. But there are special orders that he has published that incorporate most of the Israeli legislation and the everyday life, from health to education, municipal affairs. The Israeli legislation de facto applies in the settlement area. What's the main difference? The infrastructure, and especially land and planning and zoning. There, the law that applies is different. But the idea was that once we apply the Israeli law, it will make it easier for the settlers to build more freely, to expropriate Palestinian private land for settlements. And I think this idea has received, I think, a little bit of how would you say it?
A boost?
Yes, not a boost.
From the
contrary.
High Court of Justice.
Yeah, the High Court of Justice has, I would say, put a pin in this balloon because what they did in the decision on the regularization law, which was a law that really made a general kind of expropriation of private Palestinian lands where settlers had built buildings and in order to enable them to continue and not to need to evacuate them and have destructions, dismantle them. So this was the idea of the law, and what the court said, the court applied the Israeli legislation. It said it's an Israeli law, so we will apply the constitutional Israeli principles, and also we will apply the expropriation law of Israel. At least we will examine it under the laws of expropriation that apply in Israel. And the conclusion was that it is not lawful to expropriate Palestinian land for building settlements. So that means that if the Israeli law applies now, it actually will, to a certain extent, even be more difficult to go ahead with these actions. It will actually tie the hands.
Limitations.
There will be more limitations and not less limitations. Okay. So that's, and I don't want, and the next point is the international reaction, and I will end by this, and this will link. So we have to understand that from the international point of view, if Israel applies its laws, it doesn't change the status of the territory. That's written in many legal instruments, the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, the UN Security Council, and most international lawyers that applying when the law is, the territory is considered occupied, and if the occupier applies its laws to a place, it doesn't change the nature of the place as being occupied. So the world, except maybe the Trump administration, I wouldn't say the US administration, because the future one, I'm not sure, but maybe the Trump administration, maybe some more places, most of the international community will continue to view this territory as belonging to the West Bank as occupied territory, will not acknowledge and respect.
So nobody will recognize it as Israeli sovereignty
as an Israeli law, and it will create
on the other area,
problems.
There will be support to the Palestinian self-determination in those areas, all 67
yes, and
territories.
this whole move will also be viewed as a breach of international law, and even maybe as a crime, and will make our situation in the international arena, for example, in the International Criminal Court, where we are waiting every day to a decision that will allow to open probably a prosecution investigation into our potential crimes and other arenas. It will make our situation more difficult. We will have more claims against us, including also more pressure from international arenas. So it's not going to make our lives easier in the international arena, on the contrary.
Okay, Dan, is President Trump is going to save us from doing this kind of, let's say, decision?
Well, I never try to prejudge what President Trump will do. I certainly don't understand the way his mind works. But let me talk about the opportunity that some Israelis are describing, and it actually connects to Pnina's presentation. First of all, I think broadly speaking in the international community, the distinctions between annexation or applying sovereignty or applying law will be completely lost. In fact, even in Israel, the popular usage of the word sipuach, annexation, including by senior officials, President Rivlin, the journalists who write about this, is understood as what's going on here. And it's intended to state, if it happens, that Israel will permanently and unilaterally make its control over the areas that it applies a fact. That may, in fact, be something the Trump administration is prepared to recognize. They have sort of indicated that if there's a consensus in the Israeli government, that they would accept an Israeli decision and that the U.S. would recognize it. But to the extent that people perceive an opportunity, that's it. There's no other actor on the international stage who is likely to recognize Israeli sovereignty over these territories, whether it's 30% or whether it's a more limited number. There is certainly nobody in the region. Obviously, you get the very strong reaction from Palestinians, which could go from declining Palestinian-Israeli security cooperation to even over time the erosion, maybe as Abu Mazen leads the scene, of a Palestinian Authority itself, and Israel getting pulled deeper into Palestinian areas of the West Bank and creating that binational state dynamic. Jordan, which has already spoken very strongly against annexation, as something that would be injurious to the king's position with his Palestinian population. He might feel the need to respond in some way, even potentially putting at risk the peace treaty with Israel. Gulf states, with whom Israel has reasonable and improving relations, but we've seen just last Friday the very unprecedented publication in Hebrew of an article by a senior United Arab Emirates official, Yusuf al-Taiba, the ambassador in Washington, stating the opportunity cost, that in fact the progress toward normalization that Israel is achieving with Gulf states would be put at risk and potentially even reversed if annexation occurs. Europe, where many European countries have expressed their opposition and have even threatened various forms of sanctions or withholding of benefits to Israel if this goes forward. And of course in the United States, where Vice President Biden, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, and virtually all Democrats in public office and more broadly have expressed opposition to annexation. So it's not at all clear, especially since we're in an election year, just a few months away, if whatever gain that opportunity would produce of U.S. recognition would even be on the table 6 months from now.
They could always draw the recognition, right?
But I would like to say something, Dan, because I agree with you. But in the same time, we can say that it's not going to shake the fundamental pillars of the security, the policy, all of the elements of the state of Israel. Everybody is not happy, but nobody is really attempt to do real something against Israel in order to prevent Israel from annexation.
In the United States or more in the international community?
You spoke about the international community and the Arab world. Nobody is...
I don't think we know exactly what the responses will be, and it may be that there would be different responses to different versions of this, although the principle against unilateral measures by either side is firmly held, and the expectation that these territories were intended to eventually become the basis of a Palestinian state with territorial exchanges perhaps and security arrangements is still very, very deeply felt. So I don't think we know exactly what the response will be. I mean, I think we can, and I hope we will take certain things off the table. Vice President Biden himself has said he's not interested in talking about conditioning aid or calling into question the U.S. commitment to Israel's security, and I think that will always be the case. But to the extent that Israel benefits from the legitimacy of being seen as a democratic nation in the community of democracies, that it has bipartisan support that is sustainable across changes of administration in the United States and throughout American society, that it has improving relations with many of its neighbors, even those it doesn't have official relationships. All of those positives really could be put in some jeopardy by this decision, and the gain that is identified as the opportunity might be very fleeting. It might disappear in only a few months' time.
But can you share with us your knowledge, your understanding, what is going on in Washington? Because we heard that some people understand that it will be a mistake now to do that, and especially it can destroy Trump's plan by doing some kind of annexation, especially if Israel is going to annex 30% of the West Bank. This is the end of the negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. So this is the end of the story of Trump's plan. So some people say this is not the time to do that because we still believe that we can promote that plan. On the other side, there is people, of course, from the Democratic Party, which are basically against that. So what the United States is going to do in that case?
And if I can add a question, do you think that it will lead to more pressure to go ahead with a Palestinian state as part of the Trump plan? I mean, that's the fear that the right is raising. And do you think that's genuine?
I think there are divisions within the Trump administration, to be honest. It's hard to identify one stream of the policy. On the one hand, the plan was presented, and for the first time, President Trump did endorse the language of a two-state solution. To my mind, it doesn't really describe a realistic two-state solution, and it's a bit of a distortion of the concept. And if you look at the conceptual map, it's no Palestinian state that could emerge and no Palestinian leadership that could negotiate on that basis. But at least it used that framework. Nevertheless, in Israel, the discussion among the government is to say, well, we'll talk about the annexation part, but not about the two-state part. Although to some American audiences, they will say this is a realistic two-state solution. There's sort of both arguments being made. They contradict each other. Others in the Trump administration seem very committed to seeing this take place. And whether that's out of sympathy or out of some ideological belief in the rightness of the Israeli claims, that could be the case. And then there's the maybe more practical side in the administration that says, look, this is a headache maybe we don't need right now between the coronavirus and the protests in the United States and the economic crisis and struggles with China. Do we really need the risk that this decision, which although the Trump administration might be sympathetic to, could start a whole series of negative consequences? Do we really want to have to deal with that situation? I think they are struggling with that. There's even the last perspective might be that this is an advantageous political tool to use during the American election, which is to say, if there's a consensus in the Israeli government, that may be why they've now given a veto to Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi, but if they will agree to it, then the administration can present this as a great step of friendship between the United States and Israel. Democrats will oppose it, but by the fact that it has unanimous consent in the Israeli government, it's a very powerful wedge issue to use in the American election. Something I think also is somewhat dangerous for Israel to find itself being used in American politics that way. So I can't identify which of those streams within the Trump administration might actually drive this policy. I do think it's easier to identify the strong opposition on the Democratic side, but exactly what the reaction would be if it has already occurred and then a Biden administration comes in, that is too hard to know because there are so many hypotheticals and specific circumstances that would drive that decision.
So in any case, if Israel do that kind of movement, this is a big risk for Israel, especially when you look upon the future, especially the relations, let's say if there is another administration in the US, and when we look all around and we don't see any positive outcome which can come from this kind of activity.
I'm struggling to identify the positive strategic gain for Israel, and I think even the proponents of annexation are struggling to articulate the positive strategic gain for Israel.
Okay, but there is some people which are saying now, okay, let's hypothetical issue. We try now and convince Netanyahu to delay the decision. Not say that we are not taking that decision, but we decide to delay this decision. What Israel can get by postponing that, but saying that we are not doing it now. We are ready to discuss. We are ready for something. What's something that Israel can get, kind of bargaining upon that issue?
I guess here we are in the shuk. Everything
this is the Middle East.
Everything is a bargain. It's a great question. I think the best thing Israel benefits is the not walking down the path into all of those negative consequences. So it might see its own benefit by postponing this decision. I'll have to think about exactly what might be put on the table as a
this is for our next time about that. It was short this time, but we will do it in our next discussions. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Pnina, Dan,
Thank you.
everybody.